Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the Pentagon's D-ring, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. At 53, she had been cleaning these corridors for nearly 15 years, invisible to most of the uniformed officers who strode past her with urgent purpose. Her weathered hands gripped the cart handle as she made her way toward the trophy cases that lined the walls of the Naval Operations Wing. The morning shift always brought a peculiar quiet to these halls. The admirals and generals hadn't yet arrived for their daily briefings, leaving only the skeleton crew of early bird staff members and security personnel. Maria preferred this time of day. The silence allowed her to work methodically, taking pride in making each surface gleam without the constant interruption of foot traffic. She stopped before the first trophy case, a massive oak and glass display that housed decades of naval achievements. Silver cups, bronze plaques, and ceremonial swords caught the fluorescent light, each piece telling a story of honor and sacrifice. Maria had dusted these cases thousands of times, but she never grew tired of looking at the artifacts within. Sometimes she would pause to read the engraved nameplates, wondering about the men and women whose courage was preserved behind the glass. As she sprayed the cleaning solution onto her microfiber cloth, Maria noticed something unusual. Behind one of the larger trophies, partially obscured by shadows, sat a small rectangular object that didn't belong. It looked like a photograph or document that had somehow fallen behind the display. Her custodial instincts kicked in immediately. She had discovered forgotten items before. Reading glasses left by aging veterans during ceremonies, dropped pens, even the occasional classified folder that had slipped from someone's briefcase. Maria tried the trophy case handle, expecting it to be locked as usual. To her surprise, it clicked open. Someone must have forgotten to secure it properly after the previous day's ceremony honoring retired submariners. She reached carefully behind the trophy, her fingers closing around what felt like a thick envelope. The manila folder was heavier than she expected, sealed with red wax that bore an official-looking emblem. The front was marked with a series of numbers and letters that meant nothing to her, but the words "classified" and "eyes only" were stamped in bold red ink across the top. Maria's heart began to race. In all her years cleaning government facilities, she had learned one cardinal rule: never touch anything marked classified. She was about to put the envelope back when she noticed something that made her pause. Written in faded blue ink along the bottom corner were two words that seemed completely out of place: Ivory Raven. Below that, in the same handwriting, was a date from 1983 and what appeared to be coordinates. Maria had grown up in San Diego, the daughter of a Navy cook who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. She had heard countless stories about military operations, code names, and the secrecy that surrounded much of what happened behind closed doors. But Ivory Raven was unfamiliar to her, and something about finding it hidden in a trophy case felt significant. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway. Maria quickly closed the trophy case and stepped back, clutching the envelope against her chest beneath her cleaning smock. A young lieutenant walked past, barely glancing in her direction as he headed toward the elevator bank. When his footsteps faded, Maria made a decision that would change her life forever. Instead of reporting the found document to security immediately, as protocol demanded, she slipped it into her cleaning cart beneath a stack of fresh towels. Something told her this discovery was more important than a simple misfiled document. The way it had been hidden, the age of the envelope, and the mysterious code name all suggested that someone had deliberately concealed this information. Maria continued her rounds, but her mind kept returning to the envelope. During her lunch break, she found herself in the parking garage, sitting in her old Honda Civic with the manila folder on her lap. The red wax seal seemed to mock her, challenging her to break 15 years of following rules and maintaining her invisible status. She thought about her late father, who had always told her that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks. He had shared stories of sailors who had discovered important intelligence during routine duties, men whose alertness had prevented disasters or saved lives. Maria wondered if this moment was her chance to honor his memory by doing something meaningful. The decision came suddenly. She broke the wax seal with her car key, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside were several black and white photographs, what appeared to be technical diagrams, and a typewritten report that began with the words, Operation Ivory Raven, Final Assessment. As Maria scanned the documents, her eyes widened. The photographs showed what looked like a submarine in an Arctic setting, surrounded by unusual ice formations. The technical diagrams depicted some kind of acoustic equipment she didn't recognize. But it was the final page of the report that made her blood run cold. The document detailed the disappearance of a nuclear submarine and its crew during a classified mission in 1983. According to the report, the USS Thresher had been conducting secret sonar mapping in disputed Arctic waters when it encountered an unidentified underwater object. The last communication from the submarine mentioned acoustic anomalies and possible contact with non-terrestrial intelligence. The report concluded that all evidence of the mission should be classified at the highest levels, and that the official Navy records should list the submarine as lost during routine training exercises. The families of the 96 crew members were told their loved ones had died in an accident caused by equipment failure. Maria's hands shook as she read the names of the lost sailors. Among them was Petty Officer 3rd Class Roberto Santos, her cousin, whom her family had been told died in a training accident 28 years ago. Her aunt had never gotten over the loss, always believing there was more to Roberto's death than the Navy had revealed. As the magnitude of her discovery sank in, Maria realized she was holding evidence of one of the Navy's most closely guarded secrets. The envelope hadn't been misfiled or accidentally dropped. Someone had hidden it in that trophy case, perhaps as insurance or because they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it entirely. She carefully returned the documents to the envelope and started her car. As she drove home to her modest apartment in Arlington, Maria's mind raced with questions. Who had hidden the documents? How long had they been there? And, most importantly, what was she supposed to do with information that could potentially expose a decades-old cover-up? That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table with the envelope before her, a cup of coffee growing cold as she weighed her options. She could return the documents to the trophy case and pretend she had never found them. She could report the discovery to her supervisor and let the chain of command handle it. Or she could try to find someone who would listen to what she had learned about Operation Ivory Raven. The photograph of her father in his Navy uniform seemed to watch her from its place on the kitchen wall. Maria made her choice. Tomorrow, she would find a way to ensure that the truth about Roberto and the other lost sailors would finally be heard, no matter what it cost her. As she prepared for bed, Maria carefully hid the envelope inside an old photo album, sandwiched between pictures of family gatherings and holiday celebrations. She had no way of knowing that her decision to keep the documents would set in motion a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of government and ultimately change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The custodian who had spent 15 years being invisible was about to become the center of attention in a story that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. And somewhere in the depths of the Pentagon, in offices she would never see, people were already beginning to notice that something important had gone missing from its hiding place. Maria fell asleep that night with her father's words echoing in her mind. Sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be, or that her simple act of dusting a trophy case would ultimately expose one of the most closely guarded secrets in naval history. The next morning would bring changes that would transform the invisible custodian into an unlikely hero. But it would also make her a target for those who had spent decades ensuring that Operation Ivory Raven remained buried forever. Maria's hands trembled as she dialed the number she had found after 3 hours of internet research. Investigative journalist Sarah Chun had written extensively about military cover-ups and government transparency. Her articles about the Iran-Contra affair and the Gulf of Tonkin incident had earned her both Pulitzer nominations and death threats. If anyone would take the Ivory Raven documents seriously, it would be Chun. Washington Herald, Chun speaking. The voice was crisp, professional, tinged with the weariness of someone who had heard countless conspiracy theories from well-meaning but misguided citizens. Ms. Chun, my name is Maria Santos. I clean offices at the Pentagon, and I found something I think you should see. Maria's voice barely rose above a whisper, even though she was alone in her apartment. There was a pause. Ma'am, I appreciate you calling, but I get a lot of these calls. Pentagon cleaning staff often think they've stumbled onto something significant. Usually it's just Operation Ivory Raven, Maria interrupted. A submarine called the USS Thresher. 96 sailors who died in 1983, but not the way their families were told. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Shin spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Where are you calling from? Is this line secure? I'm at home. I don't know if it's secure. Should it be? Listen to me very carefully. Do not mention those words to anyone else. Do you understand? Don't talk to your neighbors, your family, your coworkers. Don't put anything in writing. Can you meet me tomorrow? Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Is it really that serious? Mrs. Santos, if you found what I think you found, then yes. It's that serious. There are people who have spent their entire careers making sure certain information never sees daylight. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in Georgetown, far from both the Pentagon and the Washington Herald offices. Maria spent the night alternating between terror and determination. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, but the faces of the 96 sailors haunted her dreams. They deserved to have their real story told. The next morning, Maria called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She took 2 different metro trains to Georgetown, checking repeatedly to see if anyone was following her. The paranoia felt ridiculous until she noticed the same man in a dark suit at both train stations, always staying exactly 2 cars behind her. Sarah Chun was already waiting at the cafe when Maria arrived, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked exactly like someone who had spent 20 years extracting secrets from reluctant sources. You look nervous, Chin observed as Maria slid into the booth across from her. Someone followed me here. A man in a dark suit. Chin's expression didn't change, but she glanced casually toward the cafe windows. Describe him. Tall, maybe 6 feet. Dark hair, sunglasses, even though it's cloudy. He got off at the same metro stops I did. That was fast, Chin murmured. They must have been monitoring communications. Did you bring the documents? Maria nodded, sliding the manila envelope across the table. Chin opened it carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page she examined. After several minutes, she looked up at Maria with something approaching awe. Mrs. Santos, do you have any idea what you found? I know 96 sailors died, and their families were lied to about how it happened. This is bigger than that. Much bigger. Chin leaned forward, lowering her voice. Ivory Raven wasn't just a submarine accident. According to these documents, it was first contact. The United States Navy encountered something under the Arctic ice that shouldn't exist, and they've been covering it up for 28 years. Maria felt the cafe spin slightly around her. First contact? You mean? I mean your cousin Roberto and his shipmates died during humanity's first documented encounter with extraterrestrial intelligence. And someone in the highest levels of government decided that secret was worth any price to keep. Chun explained that she had been investigating rumors about Ivory Raven for years, following a trail of mysterious transfers, early retirements, and suspicious deaths among Navy personnel who had served in Arctic operations during the 1980s. But she had never been able to find concrete evidence until now. The question is, Chun continued, who hid these documents where you could find them? This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this information to surface, but they couldn't risk being the one to expose it directly. As if summoned by her words, a tall man approached their table. It was the same person Maria had noticed following her, but he looked different up close. Older, with lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of carrying heavy secrets. He was wearing a navy pin on his lapel. Ms. Chun, Mrs. Santos, he said quietly, sliding into the booth beside Maria before either woman could protest. My name is Admiral William Harrison, retired. And before you run or scream, you should know that I'm the person who put those documents where Mrs. Santos would find them. Chin's hand moved toward her phone, but Harrison raised his own in a peaceful gesture. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because it's time for the truth to come out, and I need your help to do it safely. The Admiral was 71 years old, a decorated submarine commander who had served during the Cold War's most dangerous years. In 1983, he had been a lieutenant commander aboard the USS Providence, part of the task force that had been dispatched to search for the missing Thresher. We found them, Harrison said, his voice heavy with decades of guilt. The submarine, the crew, everything. But we also found something else. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. According to Harrison, the Thresher had been conducting routine sonar mapping when their instruments detected massive underwater structures beneath the Arctic ice sheet. The structures appeared to be artificial, far too sophisticated to have been created by any known technology. When the submarine moved closer to investigate, they encountered a craft that defied all known physics. The last transmission we received described lights, impossible maneuvers, and what the captain called peaceful contact. Harrison continued. Then nothing. When we found the wreckage, it was clear that something had attempted to raise the submarine from the ocean floor, probably to rescue the crew. But they were too late. The cover-up had been immediate and comprehensive. All evidence of the encounter was classified at levels that exceeded even nuclear weapons protocols. The families were told their loved ones had died in a training accident, and anyone who questioned that story found their careers suddenly stalled or terminated. For 28 years, I've lived with this knowledge, Harrison said. I've watched families grieve for loved ones while being lied to about how they died. I've seen the technology recovered from that site used to advance our own submarine capabilities, while the beings who tried to save our sailors have been painted as threats to national security. Chen had been taking notes throughout Harrison's story, her journalistic instincts warring with the sheer impossibility of what she was hearing. Why now? Why reveal this after so many years? Because they're coming back, Harrison said simply. Our monitoring stations have detected similar signatures in the same area. The acoustic anomalies, the underwater structures, everything. Except this time, there are more of them. A lot more. Harrison explained that recent satellite imagery had shown massive movements under the Arctic ice, structures rising from the ocean floor that dwarfed anything previously detected. The current administration was preparing for what they believed would be humanity's second contact, but they were planning to approach it as a military threat rather than an opportunity for peaceful communication. The president doesn't know the full truth about Ivory Raven, Harrison continued. He's been briefed on possible non-terrestrial underwater activity, but the details have been sanitized. He's being advised to treat any contact as potentially hostile. That's a mistake that could cost us everything. Maria had been listening in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what she was hearing. So what do you want us to do? I want you to tell the world the truth about Operation Ivory Raven, Harrison replied. Not just the cover-up, but the whole truth. The beings who encountered the Thresher tried to save our sailors. They're not our enemies. And if we approach them with weapons and hostility, we'll be making the greatest mistake in human history. Chen closed her notebook and looked directly at the Admiral. You realize this will destroy careers, topple governments, and fundamentally change how humanity sees itself in the universe? Yes, Harrison said without hesitation. And that's exactly why it needs to happen. The truth has been buried long enough. As the three conspirators sat in the Georgetown Cafe, none of them realized that their conversation was being monitored by sophisticated listening devices, or that a team of government agents was already mobilizing to contain what they saw as a massive security breach. The wheels of a vast conspiracy were beginning to turn, and Maria Santos, the invisible custodian, had just become the most wanted woman in America. But she had also become something more important. The key to unlocking humanity's greatest secret and preventing a tragic repetition of the mistakes made 28 years earlier in the dark waters beneath the Arctic ice. The black SUV appeared in Maria's rearview mirror as she turned onto Route 66, heading toward the safe house that Admiral Harrison had arranged in rural Virginia. Sarah Chin sat in the passenger seat, frantically typing on her laptop while trying to upload the Ivory Raven files to multiple secure servers around the world. They had perhaps 30 minutes before the government's digital surveillance teams located and shut down their internet connection. They're gaining on us, Maria said, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. Her 15-year-old Honda Civic was no match for the government vehicles pursuing them, but Harrison had chosen their route carefully. The back roads of Virginia would force their pursuers to stay close, making it impossible for them to coordinate the kind of roadblock that could end the chase quickly. Chen looked up from her laptop screen. Upload is at 60%. We need more time. Maria pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the old engine to its limits. Behind them, the SUV was joined by a second vehicle, Then, a third. The convoy stretched out like dark predators closing in on their prey. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind of revelation and terror. After their meeting at the cafe, Harrison had taken them to a warehouse in Alexandria, where he had spent years collecting evidence about Operation Ivory Raven. The room was filled with photographs, documents, technical specifications, and testimonials from dozens of military personnel who had been part of the cover-up. "This is my insurance policy," Harrison had explained, gesturing to walls covered with evidence. "Every time someone died under suspicious circumstances, every time a family asked too many questions, every time someone got too close to the truth, I documented it all." The most shocking revelation had come when Harrison showed them recent sonar readings from the Arctic. The underwater structures had grown exponentially in the past 6 months, forming what appeared to be a vast underwater city beneath the ice sheet. More disturbing was the pattern of the growth. It suggested that whatever intelligence had tried to save the Thresher crew was preparing for something massive. "They're not just coming back," Harrison had said. "They're building something. And, based on these readings, it's designed to surface." Chen had worked through the night, organizing the evidence into a comprehensive exposé that would blow open decades of government secrecy. But their time had run out faster than expected. Harrison's contacts within the intelligence community had warned him that a kill order had been issued, not just for the documents, but for anyone who had seen them. "Maria, you have to understand," Harrison had said as they prepared to leave the warehouse. "These people have spent their entire careers protecting this secret. They've killed to keep it buried, and they won't hesitate to kill again." Now, as government agents closed in behind them, Maria wondered how a simple custodian had become the target of what amounted to a state-sponsored assassination. The woman who had been invisible for 15 years was now the most visible person in America, at least to those hunting her. 75%, Chen announced. "Where the hell is this safe house?" 2 miles, Maria replied, taking a sharp turn that sent her car skidding slightly on the gravel road. Behind them, the SUVs maintained their pursuit with professional precision, neither gaining rapidly nor falling behind. They were herding their prey toward a predetermined kill zone. Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. "Ambush ahead. Take Miller Road detour. Trust no one in uniform." "Change of plans," Maria said, yanking the wheel to the right and sending the car down a narrow dirt road she hadn't noticed before. The sudden turn caught their pursuers off guard, and, for the first time since the chase began, Maria gained some distance. Chen's laptop chimed. "Upload complete. The files are now on servers in Iceland, Switzerland, and New Zealand. Even if they capture us, the information is out there." But Maria knew that wouldn't be enough. The government had sophisticated ways of discrediting information, especially something as incredible as first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Without credible witnesses to verify the story, the documents would be dismissed as elaborate hoaxes. The dirt road ended at a small farmhouse surrounded by dense woods. Harrison's car was already in the driveway, and the Admiral himself stood on the front porch, waving them toward a barn behind the main building. As Maria parked inside the barn, Harrison secured the doors behind them. "How long do we have?" he asked. "They were right behind us until we turned off," Maria said. "Maybe 10 minutes before they find this place." Harrison nodded grimly. "That's enough time to get you both to the next checkpoint. But first, there's something you need to see." He led them through a hidden door in the barn floor, down into a basement that had been converted into a sophisticated communications center. Multiple computer screens showed satellite feeds, sonar readings, and encrypted communication channels. But it was the central screen that made both women gasp in amazement. The display showed a real-time feed from the Arctic Ocean, where massive shapes were moving beneath the ice. The structures Harrison had described were not static constructions. They were alive, pulsing with bioluminescent light, and moving with purposeful intelligence. "This is happening right now," Harrison explained. 6 hours ago, these beings began rising toward the surface. "Our military is preparing to respond with nuclear weapons." Chen stared at the screen in horror. "They're going to attack them?" "The president believes he's protecting humanity from an invasion. He doesn't know that these beings tried to save our sailors 28 years ago. He doesn't know they've been peaceful. All he knows is that something massive and unknown is emerging from the ocean, and his advisors are telling him to strike first. Maria watched the graceful movements of the underwater craft and thought about her cousin Roberto. Had these same beings tried to rescue him and his crewmates? Had they been mourning the loss of human life while the U.S. government painted them as threats? The attack is scheduled for dawn, Harrison continued. That gives us maybe 8 hours to get this story to the world in a way that can't be suppressed or discredited. Suddenly, the lights in the basement flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light. Harrison moved to a bank of monitors that showed the property's security cameras. "They've found us," he said quietly. "There are vehicles surrounding the farm." Through the security feeds, they could see black SUVs and military vehicles forming a perimeter around the property. Armed agents in tactical gear were moving through the woods, their night vision equipment making them look like mechanical predators in the darkness. "There's an emergency tunnel," Harrison said, leading them toward the far wall of the basement. "It comes out near a creek about half a mile from here. But once you surface, you'll be on your own." As he opened a hidden panel in the wall, Harrison handed Chen a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. "This contains everything. Every document, every photograph, every testimony I've collected over the past 28 years. But, more importantly, it has the current coordinates of the beings in the Arctic. If you can get this to someone with access to the president, you might be able to prevent a catastrophe." Maria looked at the Admiral with new understanding. "You're not coming with us." Harrison smiled sadly. "I'm 71 years old, and I've been carrying this secret for most of my adult life. It's time for me to face the consequences. Besides, someone needs to delay them long enough for you to escape." Above them, they could hear the sound of forced entry as agents breached the main house. Heavy footsteps moved across the floors, searching for their targets. "Go," Harrison whispered, pushing them toward the tunnel entrance. "The world needs to know the truth before it's too late." Maria and Chen crawled into the narrow tunnel, their way lit only by small chemical lights Harrison had placed along the route. Behind them, they could hear shouts and the sound of the basement door being forced open. Harrison's voice, calm and authoritative, began talking to someone, no doubt buying them precious time with his surrender. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, filled with the sound of their labored breathing and the distant echo of search teams above ground. When they finally emerged near the creek, the night air felt like freedom itself. But Maria knew their ordeal was far from over. As they made their way through the dark woods toward the distant lights of a highway, Chen clutched the device Harrison had given her. "We need to reach someone in the administration who can stop this attack," she said. "But who's going to believe us?" Maria thought about the graceful beings moving beneath the Arctic ice, preparing to make contact with a species that had shown them nothing but hostility and deception. "Maybe it's not about who believes us," she said. "Maybe it's about making sure the truth is told, no matter what happens next." Behind them, lights blazed from the farmhouse as government agents discovered Harrison's elaborate documentation of their greatest secret. But the most important evidence was now in the hands of two women walking through a Virginia forest, carrying the weight of two worlds on their shoulders. The race against dawn had begun, and the fate of humanity's first open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence hung in the balance. Maria Santos, the invisible custodian who had simply been dusting trophy cases 3 days earlier, was now one of the only people who could prevent an interstellar tragedy that would echo through history. The White House Situation Room buzzed with controlled chaos as military advisors surrounded President Michael Torres, pointing at satellite feeds showing massive structures breaking through the Arctic ice. The clock on the wall showed 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the scheduled nuclear strike that would announce humanity's position on extraterrestrial contact with devastating finality. 500 miles away, Maria Santos stood in the Washington Herald newsroom, watching Sarah Chun frantically coordinate with international media outlets while trying to reach anyone, who could get through to the president before it was too late. The device Admiral Harrison had given them contained not just historical evidence of the Ivory Raven cover-up, but real-time communication frequencies that the beings in the Arctic were using to broadcast their peaceful intentions. "They're trying to communicate," Chen said, adjusting the device's antenna. "Listen to this." The speakers crackled with a sound unlike anything either woman had ever heard. harmonious tones that seemed to convey complex emotions and ideas without words. Despite the alien nature of the communication, there was something unmistakably peaceful about it, like a song of greeting carried across vast distances. "This is what our government wants to answer with nuclear weapons," Maria said, her voice heavy with the weight of impending tragedy. Chen's phone rang. It was her editor at the Herald, calling with news that sent ice through her veins. "Sarah, the story's been killed. Orders came from the highest levels. If we publish anything about Ivory Raven, the paper's government contracts get pulled and our broadcast license gets reviewed." "That's impossible," Chen replied. "This is the biggest story in human history. I know what it is. But I also know what happens to newspapers that don't cooperate with national security directives. I'm sorry." Chen hung up and immediately began dialing international contacts. The BBC, Deutsche Welle, Al Jazeera, one by one, each outlet reported the same pressure. Government representatives had contacted media organizations worldwide, classifying the Ivory Raven information under emergency national security protocols. "They can't silence everyone," Maria said. But even as she spoke, she could see the defeat in Chen's eyes. At 4:52 a.m., everything changed. The communications device Harrison had given them suddenly blazed to life with urgent signals. The Arctic beings were no longer simply broadcasting peaceful greetings. They were transmitting detailed technical specifications, mathematical proofs, and what appeared to be solutions to humanity's most pressing problems. Clean energy formulas, medical treatments for diseases that had plagued mankind for millennia, and technologies that could reverse climate change. "They know," Chen whispered. "They know about the attack, and they're trying to show us what we'll lose if we choose violence." Maria stared at the flowing data, thinking about her cousin Roberto and the 95 other sailors who had died during humanity's first contact. What if they've been waiting all this time? What if they've been preparing these gifts ever since the Thresher went down? The transmission included a detailed recreation of the 1983 encounter, showing how the beings had attempted to rescue the submarine's crew. The technology they had brought to bear was staggering. Energy fields that could manipulate matter at the molecular level, healing technologies that could repair tissue damage in seconds. But they had arrived too late to save the human sailors trapped in the crushing depths. Chen made a desperate decision. She activated every emergency broadcast system she could access, streaming the alien transmissions live to any network that would carry them. Social media feeds exploded with footage of the massive structures emerging from the Arctic ice, accompanied by the hauntingly beautiful communications from the beings within. In the White House Situation Room, General Patricia Hawkins, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, watched the feeds with growing alarm. "Sir, we need to launch now. These transmissions could be some form of psychological warfare designed to weaken our resolve." President Torres stared at the screens, showing the graceful underwater cities rising toward the surface. "General, what do our intelligence reports say about their weapons capabilities?" "Unknown, sir. But we have to assume they're significant. The technology required to construct those structures suggests they're far in advance of our current capabilities." "Mr. President," interrupted CIA Director James Walsh, holding up a tablet. "We're receiving reports of massive broadcasts on social media. Someone is streaming what appears to be alien communications, along with classified documents about a 1983 incident called Operation Ivory Raven." Torres felt the ground shift beneath him. "Ivory Raven? I've never been briefed on any operation by that name." The silence in the room was deafening. Walsh exchanged glances with General Hawkins before speaking carefully. "Sir, Ivory Raven was classified above your clearance level. It involved the loss of a submarine during a training exercise." "Don't lie to me," Torres said, his voice cutting through the political double talk. "If we're about to make first contact with an alien species, I want to know everything. Right now." As his advisors reluctantly began revealing the truth about the 1983 encounter, Maria and Chen watched the world wake up to humanity's greatest secret. News anchors struggled to process the information flooding their networks. Scientists raced to analyze the technical specifications being broadcast from the Arctic. Religious leaders grappled with the theological implications of discovering humanity was not alone in the universe. But it was the families of the Thresher crew who provided the most powerful testimony. Roberto Santos's sister Elena, now 68 years old, appeared on live television holding the same photograph Maria had seen in her kitchen. Roberto in his Navy uniform, young and proud and unaware that he would become part of humanity's first contact. For 28 years, we were told Roberto died in a training accident, Elena said, tears streaming down her face. Now we learn he died trying to make contact with beings who wanted to help us. He didn't die because of equipment failure. He died because humanity wasn't ready for the truth. As dawn approached, President Torres made the most important decision of his presidency. At 5:47 a.m., 17 minutes past the scheduled attack time, he appeared on every major network with a message that would reshape human civilization. My fellow Americans and citizens of the world, Torres began, I come before you this morning to share news that will challenge everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. For 28 years, our government has kept secret the fact that we are not alone. Torres revealed the truth about Operation Ivory Raven, acknowledged the cover-up that had hidden the peaceful intentions of humanity's visitors, and announced that instead of military action, the United States would be sending a delegation of scientists, diplomats, and family members of the Thresher crew to the Arctic. We stand at a crossroads, Torres continued. We can choose fear and suspicion, or we can choose hope and cooperation. The beings emerging from our oceans have shown us technologies that could solve climate change, cure diseases, and open the stars to human exploration. They offer partnership, not conquest. In the Washington Herald newsroom, Maria Santos watched the president's address with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. 3 days earlier, she had been an invisible custodian whose greatest concern was making trophy cases gleam. Now she was one of the people responsible for preventing humanity's greatest mistake. Chen put her arm around Maria's shoulders. You realize what you've done, don't you? You've changed the course of human history. Maria thought about her father's words about sometimes needing to take risks to do the right thing. She thought about Roberto and the other sailors who had died during first contact, and about the beings who had mourned their loss while preparing gifts for a species that had responded to friendship with suspicion and violence. No, Maria said quietly. I just dusted some trophy cases. The rest was already there, waiting for someone to notice. As the sun rose over Washington, delegations from around the world began converging on the Arctic, where massive crystalline structures had fully emerged from the ice. The beings within waited patiently, having learned that humanity needed time to overcome its fears and embrace its destiny among the stars. The woman who had discovered the truth would accompany the delegation as an official representative of the United States government. Maria Santos, the custodian who had been invisible for 15 years, would be among the first humans to walk aboard an alien vessel and officially welcome Earth's visitors to the family of conscious beings that filled the cosmos. But first, she had one more stop to make. Elena Santos was waiting at Arlington National Cemetery, where a new memorial would be erected to honor the crew of the USS Thresher, not as victims of a training accident, but as pioneers who had died during humanity's first contact with the stars. The age of secrets was over. The age of wonder had begun. And it had all started with a custodian who decided that some truths were too important to remain hidden, even if revealing them meant risking everything she had ever known. As alien ships rose from the depths and human governments prepared for the greatest diplomatic challenge in history, Maria Santos reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had found her purpose not in the corridors of power, but in the simple act of cleaning up after others and having the courage to examine what had been left behind. The invisible woman had become visible at last, and in doing so, she had helped humanity take its first steps toward the stars.